What's up guys, Protobro here, infamous brother to Mega Bro. On to another tutorial for Crusader Kings 2, this time focused on specifically the character you're going to be playing as throughout the game, and how his character traits and so forth affect the way with which you play, and how you engage with their vassals and so forth. The reason I'm starting on this screen here is because one of the first things I want to show you, if you're not aware, is that you can start off as one of the custom characters in the game, or you can actually customize and make your own character. So the way you do that is go down to ruler design, and then as you can see here, appearance, you can affect the appearance. Coat of arms you can change, all these different options here. Or have attributes. So you can make this guy as godlike as you want or as weak as you want. It's really entirely up to you. Name, dynasty, married, culture, all this stuff. The education, so they're specific, which I'll go into in a moment. Really, they're like specialty. And then traits. And one of the cool things with the traits is they got all this stuff all the way down. So what happens every time you say you do cannibal, right? You'll lose 4 years, so he'll become 12 instead of 16. But then if you do agile, which makes him 0.50 health and +2 personal combat skill, he would gain 3 years. And the way to offset that is to go down and use these here. You can do a customized ruler dynasty. So as you can see, you can kind of attach yourself to a dynasty if you want. Legitimized bastard and so forth, right? So there's a whole boatload of pretty much every character trait available to you is here for customization, right? So I just want to show that to you really quick before we launch into this for some of you who are new to the game. For those of you who played the game before, you're already aware of this. Alright, so we're going to play, again, King William the Conqueror, or King William the Bastard. Okay, so far in these tutorials we've covered your macro, how to macro your kingdom, how to micro. We talked about the overview, the whole screen here, all the various things. In this one we're going to talk about your individual character. So the ruler or the count or whatever it might be that you're playing as at the time you're playing is always the picture up here. Now bear in mind, Crusader Kings is really twofold. This one, it's based on the ruler that you're currently playing, but then more importantly it's also based on your dynasty. So you know, King William will eventually die, right? And what we care about is all these children right here, because we want one of them or multiple of them to carry the torch for us after they're gone. So the first thing I want to talk about with regards to your character is your family tree, for the very reason I just told you. Because we're not talking about just characters here, we're also talking about your dynasty and the generations that are going to come after your current character. So one thing you can look is these little icons up here. You can do the dynasty tree, which will show you basically the hereditary tree that your character comes from. Now one thing I would note is if you come from a custom character that you created, you won't have this, right? So that's, I think, one reason why it's important, you know, to not always go with the custom character for some of that flavor of having the heritage associated with it. You can attach yourself to a dynasty if you want it, but it's not the same thing. So William has, as you can see, 6 children. I just hit the scroll wheel to scroll out like that. And here, as you can see, he's married to, or he has a half-sister. And she has several children. And so that's how you can kind of tell your dynasty. And notice we're married to Queen Mathilde of England. Right? So that's your dynasty tree. Your family tree is a little bit the same. It's just a little bit different view. Notice here you have your children. This is you guys at the center, and then your parents, grandparents, and great grandparents. And then your realm tree, which I showed you previously. This doesn't really have anything to do with your family, but it's in the same tab, so I just figured I'd show it to you again. These are all the vassals that serve under you. And as you see here, we have 31,600 troops we can call upon in times of war. He has 8% of those troops, he has 7% of those troops, and so forth. So we won't go into that too much, but I just want to show that to you because it's here. Our faith, as it currently stands, is right here. So we are Catholic. The government type that we are, feudal. So there's feudal, tribal, where's government? There we go. Feudal, tribal, nomadic, and let's see, this is Muslims right here. Then you got imperial, and finally, I think there was one more. Maybe it was feudal was imperial was I thinking of. So that means it's just how you play. Like we talked about kingdom management last tutorial. Some of those rules might be a little bit different if you're not feudal. Alright, so now one thing you always want to maintain with regards to your character's ambition, you don't ever want to have this little question mark or little bubble right here. You always want to have this filled, right? So anytime you click this, you have a variety of options depending on where your ruler's at in his life. So notice here, see the realm prosper for 5 years, and I'll tell you what that means in order to achieve that goal. Have 10 children, pretty self-explanatory, win a war, right? So if we click this, now that's his ambition is to win a war. So what will happen is if he wins a war, notice he'll gain 1 martial and 50 prestige. So depending on the ambition that you pick, might be bigger and smaller rewards. The bigger the reward, obviously the harder it is to achieve. But what will happen is it'll be here, and then it'll take you several years before you can actually reset this ambition. The same thing for your focus, right? So anytime your character is, once he reaches adulthood, you have control over what focus you'll be focusing on. And as you notice here, we have 5 different areas with 2 each. We have theology, we have diplomacy, martial, intrigue, and finally stewardship, like we have here, which I'll explain in a second. And what you can do is you can basically say, hey, I want to make my guys, I want them to specialize in stewardship, for example, rulership. Notice you get +3 steward, -1 intrigue. Or business. Or maybe you want to be good at subterfuge, good at intrigue, +3 intrigue, -1 steward. So these will have an instant bonus to your overall stats here. But you can also have some additional bonus to that. For example, if we went with hunting, +2 martial, -1 intrigue, but +1 health. Say we decide to go with this, for example. Okay. It's possible that at some point, our character will get this trait right here, the hunter. So this character only feels truly alive when killing God's little creatures. He gets +2 martial, +50 health, +1 personal combat skills, +20% pursuit, and same trait opinion. So when you pick one of these character traits, there's a possibility that an additional little trait down here will trigger at some point. It's always possible, right? In this case, for hunting, this is the one that would pop up if we get so lucky as to develop this as a hobby, basically. Okay. So now we talked a little bit about these modifiers here: +2 steward, -1 martial. Your character's modifiers are right here. So ignore this for a second. I'll explain that in a second. But notice he's got 10 diplomacy. He's got 20 martial, which is really good. I really say anything 12 or higher is pretty effective. Stewardship of 14. 17 intrigue, which is really good. And then learning of 9. Okay, so where do these numbers come from? A couple different things. One, your character starts off with basic numbers just by nature of being an individual. So like him, he's got 1, 1, 1, 4. He's 11. A couple of things are doing a little bit to that, but for the most part, he's just have these because he's he's got some awareness, some realization of religion, all that sort of stuff. But then they're also modified by other things. So notice here for diplomacy, we lose 2 for being a legitimized bastard, which is right here. But then we get +1 for being crowned, so we are crowned as a king. +2 ambition. Notice right here we are ambitious. And then +1 diligence and +1 patience. So patience and where's diligence? Diligence. Okay. So these are individual character traits, and they can be good or bad. And what these do is these directly affect a couple different things. 1, your overall stats here. 2, your piety and your prestige. And then 3, actually it's 4. 3, your relationship with other vassals and other characters in the game. And then 4, your ability to perform certain functions, whether it's intrigue or combat on the battlefield, or theology or whatnot. So what I mean by that is, so for example, proud. Okay, so you see a red, it's a deadly sin, or so known to the church. So they're going to be red in the background. Whereas favorable church traits are going to be green, circle green. Now you think red, sin, bad, right? Not necessarily. Notice you get a plus 25 on prestige. You do lose piety, but one of the things you also benefit from is sometimes you get a event that pops up, and because you have proud, you're able to do something unique about that event that you wouldn't normally have to do. So that's a big advantage. Another advantage too for having a sin might be if you have, say, for example, wrath. So I'm going to show you wrath here. Again, it's red, it's a circle, it's a deadly sin. Notice you lose 1 on intrigue and diplomacy, but you do gain 3 on martial, and you get a morale damage modifier of plus 10%. So again, you lose for most of your sins, you're going to get a positive and a negative. I don't know if you get anything positive from envy. You do from martial and intrigue. So again, positive church traits are going to be circular green. Negative church traits are circular red. And you see your patience. Look at all those positive modifiers we get. So there really isn't necessarily anything wrong with being patient. You do lose out on your wrath trait. Temperate. So what all of these do here is that they modify these numbers here, and then they also modify your relationships with vassals and so forth. The reason you want these numbers as high as possible is that the higher the number is, the more likely you're going to be able to trigger whatever action it is you're attempting to do. So if it's martial, for example, and you're on the battlefield, the higher your martial skill is, the more likely you are to trigger a special event on the battlefield, whether it's a formation from your troops on the line, or some sort of flanking maneuver or whatever. The higher your martial is, the more likely you are to trigger that special action. Same thing for example, intrigue. The higher your intrigue number is, the more likely you are going to be able to execute a plot that you're trying to perform, or inhibit or prohibit a plot from occurring against you. So if someone's trying to assassinate you, the higher your intrigue level is, the more difficult it will be to assassinate you. These numbers over here in brackets mean this is basically the combination of your spouse, so her individual traits here, numbers here, plus your council. Alright, so this is why it's important to have capable people on your council, because it affects your overall kingdom numbers here. So we make up half of our intrigue. The rest of it comes from our counselors who have plus 11, and then our wife who has plus 3. So 6 here. Right. So we get 50% of her stats. So spouse plus 8, right? Because she's got 16, and so forth. And then our council. So counselors 14. So these numbers are really what you want to look at when you're talking about your ruler, except on the battlefield. But your macro level empire or kingdom activities, this is what you're looking at. And again, this is your counselor who's in that particular position, plus your spouse, plus your stuff. On the very far left, you're going to see basically a education level. So this is basically how your character was raised. Was he raised to be a theologian? Was he raised to be a military man? Was he raised to be a steward? All those variety of things. And there's basically 4 different levels that the character can achieve as far as education. The lowest is +1. The second is +3. The third is +6. And then finally, the best is +9. So notice here we're a brilliant strategist and martial +9. That means we are the best you can be at martial. The best we can be on the battlefield as far as our education level is concerned. She, on the other hand, is a fortune builder, which means that she's the second best because she has +6 instead of +9. +9 is going to be your Midas touch. But she's a fortune builder, which means she's really good, but she's not the best she could be at stewardship, which is right here. So what you want to look for, and the reason I'm highlighting this right here is really what you want to be putting your counselor positions in. So if I'm looking, for example, if I'm looking for a spy master, I'm going to be looking right here. Now this guy is better at being a marshal than he would be at being a spy master, right? We want, let's see if I have anybody who, do we have anybody who's, here we go, so like him, right? He's a flamboyant schemer. He really belongs down in the intrigue area, in the spy master area, because of the purple here. So purple is going to be your intrigue, yellow is going to be your stewardship, red is your marshal, blue is your diplomacy, and then gray is your theology. So he was educated to be a good at intrigue. He wasn't educated to be a diplomat. He was educated to be a soldier, marshal, but it only has +3, he's not a +9, right? So we probably want to see if we can find maybe at least a +6. Now the reason I'm focusing on this is that this guy here is not going to be a very good spy master, even if he has, say, like a 15 or 16 state intrigue. And the reason I say that is that the manner with which the member or the individual was educated drastically affects how they perform at doing things that are not what they were trained to do. So if this guy is asked to do a bunch of intrigue or a bunch of theology or a bunch of stewardship stuff, he's just not going to be as good at it, even if he had high numbers here, because again, his education was in combat, not in one of those other things. So one of the things I always look for is, let's just pretend for a second this has got 11, right? Say the guy I want to replace him has a 9 in intrigue, but also has this, say like this guy has a flamboyant schemer. So he's got 10, so it's 1 less. He's going to be better at being a spy master than this guy is, because even though he's got a higher number here, he doesn't have the flamboyant schemer. So in summation, you always want to look at this far left education modifier, figure out what they were trained in, and that's going to be kind of what you're going to want to focus them on, even if they have high numbers and other things. Now again, you can get by with someone having a high number here and they'll be okay, but really what I've seen is my chancellor, if he has gray eminence, which is a blue skill trait here, which means he was educated to be a diplomat and he's got a +9 in diplomacy, so he's a gray eminence. I find that even somebody else who has the same level of diplomacy, the guy with the gray eminence tends to trigger events much more frequently. So I do think it makes a huge difference. So focus on what they were educated in first and foremost over their numbers here. Alright, so we've talked about church virtues, which again, circular green. We've talked about circular reds, which is your sins. We've talked about this far left icon here, which is the education that your person received. On the bottom here is going to be your combat modifiers. So notice he's a siege leader, so he's got +40. And then you can hover over this to give your combat modifiers. So on the bottom here is going to be the combat modifiers when they're in combat. Another thing I want to tell you about is the heart shape trait. So notice she has a heart-shaped trait, which means she's a dwarf. The heart shapes means it's genetic, which means there's a possibility that this will get passed down to your children. So, because she's a dwarf, it's possible that one of these are dwarfs. One of our children are dwarfs. He has a lisp, which is probably originated from the dwarf characteristic. He's a homosexual. Well, that's fabulous. It's going to screw up our ability to procreate. Okay. But for example, some other traits that can be passed down that are genetic. If you look at tall, see how it's a heart? It's a genetic trait. +1 diplomacy, +1 combat skills. So that can be passed down to your children. Attractive is another one. Again, the heart. +1 diplomacy, +10% fertility. Here's that Midas touch I was telling you about. She's +9 in stewardship, so she's very good at stewardship. Here's the one below it, which is fortune building. Notice these are yellow, so they're steward. Here's blue, which means diplomacy. So she was trained in diplomacy. She's an okay diplomat, +3, not great. He rather, but what's another trait that'll pass down through genetic lines? Oh, here we go. I want to search all so I can show you genius. Alright, genius. So you want genius. If you can marry or have a concubine who has genius, the possibility of this passing down your children is pretty good. So notice that massive bonus you get to all your base stats. Again, it's a heart shape, which means it passes down to the family. Some of these ones are different. Notice these a little bit different icons because he's out in probably India or something. And then one thing lower than genius is quick. So again, heart shape, but again, quick, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So what might happen is, you say she was a genius and we had children. One of these would probably be quick, if not 2, because it passes down through the genetic line. All right, and then one other thing is inbred. So sometimes you'll see an inbred. Notice here, heart shape again, weak, so likely to pass down to the children. Okay, so that's another character trait I wanted to highlight for you. And then you got some of these other ones like that are kind of circular that don't necessarily, I think, fall within a particular, I guess, self-identifier just by identifying it. Cynical, some of those other things that you'll see. But really the takeaway is these here define your character's personality, and you can add and take away from these as you progress through your life. And so you'll be given events like, you know, say you imprison and decapitate one of your vassals. You might get the trait cruel that'll go here, which will have a diplomacy hit, but will give you bonuses on the battlefield. You know, you may be given an option where if you do something, it'll make you kind. So you do that, and then you get the kind trait. Or you might be on the battlefield and you don't want to go to hand-to-hand combat with someone who offers a duel. Then what'll have happen, you'll pop up here, you know, maybe Craven as a character trait. And so these all basically define your character's personality. The claims here and the title stuff I'm going to cover in a separate tutorial with armies and expanding your empire, so we'll cover that in a little bit. Family, these are your parents, obviously, grandparents, and so you can click them and see, you know, what kind of family they had. You know, so we had just one sister, but then lots of siblings. So you just click the faces to switch around. These are all our children, and then these are our siblings. Notice, but only one of our siblings, though, is actually biological. So the problem what happens is we married into these 3. So what you're looking at here is the blood drop. If it's a bright blood drop, then that means it's someone who's very close member of your family, whether it's a son, a mother, a brother, a sister, immediate family. But then what you'll also see is blood drops that are dark in color. Those are family dynasty members, which means you may end up playing as one of those if all your immediate family die off. But they're more like cousins, nephews, nieces, cousins, all those kind of things. They're not immediate family. So what should happen is when she has children, which she already does, but if she has like another child, then what should happen is that they should be, you know, so actually technically right now these should be dark blood drops. Not quite sure whether or not right now, but they should be. The relations tab just tells you the relations that you have. So if you have friends or rivals, friends are usually people that you can lean on for favors. Rivals you want to keep a close tab on. Lovers are people that you have kind of on the side in addition to your wife. And then obviously through marriage ties, right? These are her brothers through there. These are all your vassals that serve under you. And as you can tell, we got some that like us and some that don't. So the ones that don't like us, notice here again, you're looking at our character traits. Liege is crown, so we get a +10. Liege is diligent, +5. Brave, 5. However, we're both ambitious. So what I want to take away from there is you don't want ambitious vassals. You just don't. It's good for your own guy to be ambitious because of all the perks you get here. Look at all the pluses you get to your character, to your modifiers. But when you have a vassal that's ambitious, you automatically lose 30 relationship with them. So you do not want, if at all possible, an ambitious vassal. Instead, what you want is a content vassal. So content is like the opposite of ambitious. So one of the things you'll see in this game is that there's always basically one extreme or the other. If you have patient, you have wrath. If you have brave, you have craven. And so there's always going to be an opposite. If you have cynical, then there's zealous. And so you can go with neither. So you can basically not have the character trait here, or you can have one or the other. You can't have both though. Instead of proud, you would have humble. And so on and so forth. Alright. And then notice here, because of the virtues that we have as far as character traits, we do get a couple pluses. But then proud, right? Because we're proud and cynical, we lose 10. So again, you're kind of getting hopefully getting the picture by now here, right? Hopefully I'm not beating a dead horse, but obviously these play a big part. And then finally, here's your house. I talked about that. There is one other thing I want to talk about, and now for the life of me, I cannot remember. Oh, that's right. Okay. Under the Intrigue tab, you go down to Decisions. There's a variety of decisions that you can make that directly impact your ruler. Sometimes you'll see here an option to conduct a pilgrimage, which will help your piety and so forth, and you get some bonus stats to that. You can change your culture. So right now I think we're Norman. We're Norman, but we're in an Anglo-Saxon country, and most of our vassals are Anglo-Saxon. And so perhaps we want to convert to the Anglo-Saxon culture to get rid of that negative modifier that we're suffering from because we're not Anglo-Saxon. We can have a feast at our capital, which will hopefully improve our relationship with our vassals. Some may refuse to come, which will hurt our relationship with them. But if you do this, it costs a lot of money, but it can improve your relationship with a lot of your vassals. Same thing, your summer fair, and then grand hunt. That may improve your martial skill, your prestige, maybe make you a hunter, those sort of things. Buy indulgence for your sins. Your relationship with the Pope improves. Give charity. So all these options are available for you under the Intrigue tab, under Decisions. And new ones will pop up from time to time, depending on the situation, which will kind of open up new doors for your character to kind of grow, depending on whether you have the money or not, or you're in a position to do it or whatever. Alright, so I think with that, I think I've covered pretty much everything you need to know about your specific character. Again, without go out beyond that. You always want to be married, for sure. Because again, like we talked about these modifiers here, plus the fact that you want to have, the ability to have more children, theoretically, right? But the minimum, like these modifiers here, plus it gives you alliances. Which I'll talk about a little bit further when we talk about the army tutorial that I'm going to do. And this ring here just means it's a regular marriage. One thing I do want to highlight, and this is what I'm going to conclude this tutorial on, and please, I'm going to foot stomp this. You can do what's called matrilineal marriages. So let's say we want to marry him off. Again, I clicked him, I right-clicked, arrange marriage. I actually want to arrange betrothed because he's under 16. So that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, which is what I like to do, is you can start off with the person you want to marry, like him, or what you can do is you can find a character and then marry him to him. So if we were to go here, let's say we want to... Okay, so she's 11, so we're going to arrange betrothed to our oldest son. Right there, he's currently going to be king. And then you do matrilineal. Under the terms of a matrilineal marriage, any children born of the union will be of the mother's dynasty rather than the father. Alright, so this means that any children born will be of French descent, not of Anglo-Saxon English descent. But if you click that, they may be inclined to do it. Right? You can't do it right now, but be aware of that, because sometimes what will happen is you'll offer up a normal marriage and they'll counter with the matrilineal. You do not want matrilineal. Matrilineal is good for you to use, I think, if you really, really need an alliance. Maybe you can marry off, one of your pretender sons to get that bloodline out of your dynasty. But pretty much the only time you want to do matrilineal is really one of two ways. If it's your own daughter, right? Because that means that their dynasty will end and yours will continue. Or find a claimant, say claimant to Scotland, for example, and say he was willing to come to England. We'd invite him to England, and then once he's in our court, he has no choice but to accept a matrilineal marriage if we were to offer it to him. So if we were to tell him, hey, you're going to marry my daughter, and it's going to be matrilineal, he would have to accept, which means that in one generation, we would have children in our dynasty that have a claim to Scotland. So that's the other way to do it. So again, the foot stomp is you can use matrilineal marriage. Only recommend it in two situations. One, if you just desperately need an alliance with somebody, maybe marry off one of your pretender sons to get that out of the bloodline. But most importantly, and I think the time you really want to use it is if you want additional claims, for example, to Scotland, you invite a person who has a claim to Scotland to your court, and then he will be forced to accept a matrilineal marriage, and within a generation you will have dynasty members that have claims to Scotland. Alright, so that concludes this video. Hopefully that was helpful to you all. In the next video we will talk about expanding your empire, whether it's through diplomacy or cold hard steel. Thanks for watching, guys.